Well, thank you for recording. Forgot about that. Welcome, everyone, to San Antonio / Austin .NET User Group meetup. Once again, our speaker this week is Patrick Robinson, who is a San Antonio local, who is speaking on some stuff with Flyway, sounds like. And to go over some group things first, and I believe Ashish has a couple things as well. As always, if you're interested in speaking, please do. We prioritize local speakers. You don't need any qualifications. User groups are, in general, a really good way to get started with speaking, low risk way to do that if you were interested in that. You can email Ashish if you want to do that. I will put our emails in the chat. All the things I'm talking about, I'm going to put in the chat in a moment. We have the Google Drive for the user group recordings. I believe Ashish may have the YouTube up on his side as well. We will have a feedback form for this, just a Google form for this meetup. We have the Dev SA Discord, which is a separate group from this. It's a general kind of like conglomerate of the San Antonio tech groups. There's still the San Antonio Startup Week coming up October 14th to 18th. I think Patrick is speaking at that as well, actually, if I remember right.
I think that got moved to November 15th.
Okay.
Yeah. But yes, I'll be doing a lightning talk there.
Yeah. And we also have an event coming up in November called Code Retreat. This is a free event, and it's like 8:30 to 5. So most of the day we pay for your breakfast and lunch. And it's mostly about, during work, we have deadlines and stuff. You have a feature you're trying to finish, and you never get as much time to practice your craft itself. So Code Retreat is kind of more around, you do have a problem you're trying to solve, but the goal is not even to solve the problem. It's to practice something along the way that you choose. So for this one, we've chosen TDD, test-driven development, to practice. Kind of the same concept as musicians jam in their garage just for fun, not to create anything, but because they enjoy it and get better. And this is kind of the same concept, but for programming. So I'll post the sign up link for that in chat. And I think that's all I had. So I'll put all this stuff in chat and kick it over to Ashish for his stuff.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. Seeing a lot of new faces on names on coming online. So real quick recap, what our mission is to rebuild and create a thriving .NET community in Austin and San Antonio. I think we're coming up on a full year now. So we've had a great lineup of speakers. We really want to hear from y'all. We don't want this to be a community where we have to find high power speakers, but we want to find local community speakers to be able to talk about something interesting, really, and within the .NET world. So please, love to hear ideas that you have, and if you want to kind of jam on that too, feel free to reach out to myself. One note is we are going to be launching a YouTube channel to be able to post all of these great videos. So it looks a little bit. It's easier to access versus right now it's on a Google Drive. We'll send that out in our follow-up email. May not launch till next month, but just to give you a heads up, as well as we're going to have an Austin.NET User Group LinkedIn page. Would love for you guys to follow that. We'll also send that out. And then the last thing, I know, I think you went to this last year, Daniel. Did you go to Day Texas last year?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so there's a great event coming up called Day Texas. It's going to be a while. It's in end of January 25th, but they are asking for speakers. And so I will send that out as well in the chat and follow in the follow-up email. I think that covers it. And yeah, I'll hand it back off to you, Patrick. Excited to hear you talk. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. I'll go ahead and share my screen to get started. Y'all see my slides? I feel like that's the stereotypical, like the beginning of every presentation. Can you see my screen? And
yeah, very blue.
Awesome.
Yep.
So I have a QR code on here and I have one at the end. It's just a link to, I literally stood up a website to host the slides and links to repos and ways to contact me, and hopefully plan to continue putting stuff out there. But I wanted to make it so that I could resource y'all with the information that I'm presenting today. So that's what that QR code is. But we're going to talk about, I like puns. So I put Flyway with integration testing with Flyway, test containers, and Entity Framework Core. So today what we're going to be talking about, we'll go ahead and, well, first, let me introduce myself. Sorry, I'm going to get ahead of myself. I'm Patrick. If you don't know me, I'm Patrick. Nice to meet you. I'm a software consultant at Lean Techniques. I work with Daniel Ward. He and I are consultants there, and I do some coaching, some software delivery, and I like to say fun technical stuff for all the in-between stuff that we get to do. But if you need to reach out to me or contact me, this information's in the slides and also on that website. But yeah, I got about, oh gosh, I have to do the math every time I try to think of how long I've been in the industry, but I've been doing software development basically since 2011, in consulting since about 2020. And so yeah, that's a little bit about me. I also, random fact, have a poodle, and my favorite ice cream flavor is chocolate chip cookie dough, for anyone that really wants to know that. So today's agenda, we're going to talk about, first, I'm going to talk about some assumptions that I want to address going into this. And then we'll move on to talking about integration testing and kind of like what it is and how that compares to things like unit testing and why they're different, why they're important. Also talk about the tooling. And then there will be a couple of demos, at least one demo, but might be two. And then I'll have time for questions at the end. So yeah, let's get into the assumptions. So some of the assumptions that I have going into this are, you as an individual or even as a team already value testing. I'm going to assume that you're interested in this talk because you value testing your code. And I'm also going to assume that you have or plan to have integration tests in your code. Also, you want to run integration tests more easily locally. So you want to be able to test it, not just like wait for it to go in the pipeline and, 5, 10, 15, 30 minutes later, find out, oh man, it didn't work. And because I've also been at places, different clients that they have integration tests, but it's really hard to get working locally. So going to try to assume that you want to be able to do that more easily if you're already having trouble. And also that you want to speed up iterating on integration tests. Because if you have to stand up an entire like local environment or something just to test your code, it kind of gets cumbersome if you don't have that scripted or automated in some way. So my goal here is to really make your life easier. And then another thing that I put in as a little not caveat, but like a little extra assumption is that you might have some views or stored procedures, and you might have run into a situation like I did recently where you're using Entity Framework and you want to manage views and stored procedures because maybe it's a pre-existing code base and there's views or stored procedures in there, and there's not really like a super clear, easy way to handle views in a user-friendly or a good dev experience kind of way. Also, I'm seeing a couple of chats. I don't know if I'd need to.
Hey
I
Patrick,
guess
we'll monitor that and let
you'll
you
monitor
know
that.
if we get
Okay,
any
cool.
questions. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's all good.
sorry. Just the little thingies on this side. So, all right. Yeah. So you might have user stored procedures and you're like, man, in a framework, it'd be really cool if there was a better way to do this. So after those assumptions, I'm going to talk a little bit about integration testing. I kind of want to, I just saw this GIF recently and I just felt like I had to share it. The difference between unit testing and integration testing, I feel like is very well summed up in this, this GIF. Is basically, the pieces could all work individually, but if you don't put them all together in some way, it's kind of hard to know that it truly works. So, but moving on from unit versus integration tests, they invoke multiple parts of a system together. They usually are like, let's say you have a controller or something, you go all the way down to the database level. Or it could even be as simple as you have a service that's calling another service, whether it's third party or your own service. You're integrating multiple pieces together. You also, like I said, external dependencies. like if you're depending on a database, that would be an external dependency from your code. So being able to integrate that, and they're also usually less deterministic. You have to do setup to really be able to control those dependencies. And then it's also useful for testing legacy code. So like if you're coming into a code base that already has code but doesn't have any tests, it's usually pretty good to start by writing integration tests around the logic before trying to dive down into unit tests and fully understanding that. A lot of times get asked the question, how many tests, whether it's unit, end-to-end, or integration. I feel this diagram kind of shows it pretty well, but basically you want to have the most unit tests as far as test coverage because they're faster, they're smaller, lightweight, but an integration test takes a little bit longer to run. And a full end-to-end test, you probably want much fewer of those because they're more brittle. Like the further you go up this, I guess, triangle or pyramid or whatever you want to call it, it's going to be more brittle because of all the setup and the data that has to be set up to like make the test work, and also connecting all the different dependencies. So, but integration tests, the ones that are in the middle, or even the end-to-end ones, you want to have fewer, but still have pretty good comprehensive coverage of your code. But my usual favorite answer to the how many tests is just the basic consulting answer. It depends. So, but hopefully this graphic helps communicate that a little bit better. So what I want to share, this is kind of my hypothesis slash, like, if you remember one thing from this talk, it's that I want to propose to you that integration tests hold greater value when testing against the closest to prod-like environment where feasible. So it might not always be easy to have a prod-like environment, but the closest you can get, the better. And using tools like Flyway, Testcontainers, Entity Framework, like a fair majority of us probably know about Entity Framework, but Testcontainers or spinning up using Docker Compose or something to be able to create the most prod-like environment is going to give you the most value on your tests, and especially if they can run in a pipeline. Because if you can get everything running automatic, you can know quicker if something's failing, or have more confidence even that when something's passing, like, hey, it's using the same type of database, or like the same database or SQL engine or the database engine. If you're actually, like, if you're using Postgres in prod, or let's say you're using MS SQL or whatever, and then you're using SQLite locally, that's not going to be the same comparison. Or in memory, if you've ever run into the in memory gotchas, I have a long list of gotchas from in memory with SQLite that it basically doesn't act the same. And so, yeah, so the more prod like that you can get in your integration tests, I believe the more value you will have in your integration tests. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the tooling at this point. So at a high level, like, we're going to talk about Flyway, Docker, Testcontainers, and I couldn't find a good enough graphic for Entity Framework Core, so I just put .NET as my graphic for Entity Framework. But we're going to talk about the different tooling. And first thing I'm going to talk about is Testcontainers. If you're not familiar with Testcontainers, they are basically, they use Docker. I think it can use Podman. Some cases, I don't have the exhaustive list, but I know that there are some features that Podman will work as well if you don't like Docker desktop. But it's a framework or tool, however you want to call it, for managing containers in Docker for your tests. It'll automatically spin up, spin down. It has some really cool features to be able to add a whim, just like spin up a new container for something, or pretty much you can do whatever you want with it. But they have modules that they've created for like SQL, Postgres, and all that stuff. And like I said, it automatically spins up, spins down containers. It's a pretty cool tool. I will caveat that I would not say like just go and use Testcontainers. I would say evaluate it for yourself, because sometimes getting very specific types of Testcontainer configurations set up can take longer than probably just doing a Docker Compose and running your tests in the pipeline or running them locally. But Testcontainers is a powerful tool that has helped me in the past to be able to spin up a very quick and easy prod-like environment for running integration tests locally. And it's been super helpful. And it integrates well with .NET, with like the MS test or NUnit or XUnit. The demos today, my examples are going to be using XUnit. For those of you that are familiar, if you're not familiar, I can maybe do a very brief high-level introduction to it, but XUnit is very similar to NUnit, using facts and theories rather than, I think it's like test class or test fixture, things like that. Entity Framework Core, I hope most everyone on this call is fairly familiar with Entity Framework. Very common ORM. It's a simple interface to the database, and it allows you to do database first and code first approaches to basically spinning up or communicating with your database. Very high level. It just is a really nifty tool for talking to your database and also doing migrations. But it has its limitations, which I'll get into. If I remember correctly, I believe it is time for the Entity Framework migration demo. So I'm going to try to show you today what my problem with Entity Framework for migrations is when it comes to views and stored procedures. So I'm going to switch over to my code view. I have dark mode on right now, but I think I can switch it fairly quickly to light mode if it's hard to see. Let me pull up the tests. So I'm going to pull up.
I would suggest switching to a light theme just because of the recording. If there's any compression, dark text on dark background does not compress very well. Dark text on light background doesn't look awesome either, but it's hopefully readable at least.
Cool. But is this visible, readable? Do I need to make the text any bigger?
No, looks great. Probably a little bit bigger.
Okay. So just a high level, I made a simple API that has a few controllers on it. So it's got users and posts. That's all it really does. And it just has a get all, and I think I have a add user and then posts. And then I have a couple of references to views. And so I did this one using Entity Framework. So I've got the blog context, the DB context, things like that set up. And it's got a view and two views in here, one of which is the post detail view. This is just kind of like, here's the post title text, and then who wrote the post, which user or author. And so basically in Entity Framework, for the most part, you just kind of reference a view that exists. And as far as migrations, if you're familiar with that, it creates, when you do migrations from a code first standpoint, it'll create the blog snapshot, and then you've got your migration files that are in order of the date. So I've got the initial one where I create the tables. And then this is the one thing I don't like about Entity Framework, as I've found it for handling views, is whenever you need to update a view, you have to come in here and basically kind of just write the SQL query in the migration builder. And like kind of you have to just like, I don't mind writing SQL, but the problem I have with this is if I ever need to make a change, I have to go and create a new migration and then go in and manually type in another SQL query that I can't easily do a git diff on the view to know what changed. And really being able to kind of very easily as a dev know what changed from version 1 to version 2 on a view. So this particular way just kind of bothered me. So I mostly wanted to point this particular thing out. But if you want to see, we can also walk into, so that's the problem that I'm going to talk about more. And I have a demo of how to do it with Flyway coming up in a little bit. But this is probably the biggest problem that I've run into recently with managing my migrations with Entity Framework, specifically with views and stored procedures with pre-existing code. So just to give you a kind of high level overview of some of the tests, basically with XUnit, one of the things that we have to do in order to set up our test containers, we have to come in here and create a fixture. And the way that works, one of the things that XUnit has to kind of help with standing up a fixture for test containers specifically, it's not XUnit specific to test containers, but it's a tool in XUnit that allows for test containers to spin up and spin down automatically, is the async lifetime interface, which gives us the initialize async and dispose async lifetime calls. So basically, test containers gives you these really cool builders, like the Postgres or PostgreSQL builder lets you build a container and give it parameters so that you can basically spin up a container. So like the container object gets built using the PostgreSQL builder, and then in the start async or initialize async, we have the container.start async call. So that will actually spin up the container. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find my, there it is. So I currently have my database up and running using Docker Compose so that I can actually go and hit it. I have data in there right now, but I can spin it down. So what I'll do is I keep forgetting because I'm used to dark mode that this is the actual IDE. So as you can see, I can show that that's spun down. There's no container running. But when I go to run my test, let's go to my testing output. And if I just run all the tests and switch back over to Docker, what's going to happen is that this Ryuk, I don't know how to pronounce that name, but this container is the like controller for all the containers that get spun up. So as you can see, it kind of spun up a little Postgres container and then it disappeared. Basically, once it ran all the tests, it removed the container when it was done. And then it also removes itself. So it's kind of nice that it automatically handles that. And what's going on inside of this class is just basically spinning up that container using test containers. So again, there's the builder, it builds, give the configuration for the container, but initialize will do the start async. And then I have the context doing the migrate for the entity framework handling the migrations. It's spinning up the container, migrating the database, and then I have a thing called respawner in here, not to get too in depth in what that does, but that allows me to reset the database back to the original state. So like it'll delete all of the data whenever I call reset database, it'll basically just reset the data. So that way, all of my integration tests, when I run them, they all start with an empty database. So if I want to test a specific scenario, I have to add that specific scenario to the database. So kind of jumping into this test scenario right here, I have the get all post details. Like I said, that's that view where it's combining the user and the post table, and then basically saying, here's the post ID, here's the post title, here's the post text, and here's the author's name. And what it's doing here is I'm adding a user, adding a post, saving those changes, and then I am making my test expected object. I'm making the call using the HTTP client that is generated from a custom web application factory. Now, the web application factory is another high level topic, but basically what this does is it spins up a test server, so to speak, for lack of better terms. It's a test server that kind of resembles your API running virtually, and then basically going in and taking out the original DB context and adding one using the connection string from the test container that was just spun up. So this database fixture get connection string, if I go and look at it, it's actually grabbing that from the SQL container from test containers. So it kind of lets you spin up stuff. You don't have to keep track of all the configuration. I have special configuration in here just because I like to make sure it's all the same, and also to not let, I could let it use the defaults, but I wanted it to be the same as my app config so that whenever I use Docker Compose, that I'm getting the same situation if I'm just running it locally and playing with it versus running the tests as well. So that's why I'm specifying all of the defaults, or specifying instead of using defaults. So again, back to my original problem with Entity Framework is the views. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about Flyway as a tool to give you a better way to handle views. However, there are some trade-offs. So my goal today is not to persuade you specifically to use a tool versus the other, but to show you the differences between the tooling. So Entity Framework, it is a very powerful tool for migrating databases. Yes, you can handle views and store procedures, but I really like the way that Flyway handles it. But the thing that you lose out with Flyway, which you'll see in a little bit, is whenever I do add migration with Entity Framework, it's kind of auto magical. It'll add everything for you, and then you just run and it all works. I mean, there's a lot of underlying stuff that's going on, but being able to just add a migration and then run is pretty straightforward and pretty easy. So it'll be a little bit more manual making migrations with Flyway, but as far as views, I do believe that Flyway does handle it better. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to come back to the code in a minute, but let's jump back over to the slides. And we're going to talk about Flyway. So what Flyway is, it's a tool that was created by Redgate. So if you go and look up Flyway and Redgate, you'll find their website, and they have a lot of community involvement, or a lot of the community is getting involved with it, but also they have a lot of documentation on how to use it. You can also use it in a container, which I'm going to show in our next demo, so that you don't have to install Java on your machine and all the other things that go with making Flyway work locally. You can just run it in a container with a command, and it's really nice. But it lets you manage your migrations using actual, just simple versioned SQL scripts. And what I mean by versioned, I'll get into when I pull up the code here in a minute. And then just a couple of other things. Docker, we're already using Docker. We're using Postgres for the database. I probably should have put the slide a little bit earlier. So yeah, we're going to do the Flyway one. So one second, I'm just going to pull down main. Or not pull down, it's already pulled down. It's right here. So now I've got main, which has the Flyway stuff here set up. So I'm going to go ahead and give you an overview of Flyway's versioned SQL scripts. So now I have, with Flyway, I can go in and I can do my migrations using SQL. And the versioning part is having the letter V, and then some number, like for this instance, I chose V, like number, decimal, number. And then you have 2 underscores and then the name of the migration. And so what that does is it makes it so you can version it. So like this is the first one, is I made the users table. And then my version 1.01, I'm making my posts table that references that users table with a foreign key. And so this allows you to manage your state of your database using SQL rather than just letting Entity Framework kind of just do all that work for you. But you can still query it using Entity Framework. The caveat or the trade-off that I mentioned earlier is, so if you switch to using Flyway for managing your migrations, you now have to ensure, and this can be done through your integration tests or even tests of like just your repository layer, just to make sure your models still work, is you now have to make sure that all of your models in Entity Framework match up to the SQL that you have in Flyway. So that takes an extra step. So it could be maybe the Entity Framework is still the right choice for you, but in my opinion, with views, it has been much easier to manage views using Flyway rather than trying to go in and see if updates or migration scripts that have SQL view creation or drop stuff are similar, because that's a lot harder to compare rather than just SQL to SQL. Now, what you may also notice in the top left is this repeatable. So Flyway has this ability with their migrations is for the ability to do what's called repeatable migrations. So every time you do a migration with Flyway, it will do the repeatable migrations after the version ones go off. So that's a great place to put your views. And the beauty of it is you can create a repeatable script for each view. So in this case right now, I have my view here. If I want to make an update to it, and if somebody is wanting to compare it, you literally have the original or like the previous version view. When you're looking in Git, you can have a Git diff of like if it's white space or if they changed a field or if they changed a data type or a foreign key or whatever they changed in that SQL script, you can now see the difference. Yeah, that would be Cool. I happened to see the chat on that one, Daniel. But yeah, so one of the things that I've looked at, I actually slight tangent, but related, is I actually did see somebody online when I was doing research on how to handle views with Entity Framework. Somebody literally made a tool that would, or made some kind of pipeline where it would actually spit out the SQL the um, for the views, and then they would just version it in their version control so that they could check it, and they would have like the view name and then like version 1, version 2 like next to each other, but it was still like a lot of hoops to jump through. But yeah, no, it would be really cool. So basically what's going on in here, the main difference in here is if I go back to the database fixture, is we're using a generic container from Testcontainers. They don't have a module for Flyway. I actually made a GitHub repo and like built a like homegrown version of a module for Flyway, but I have not tried to propose it to Testcontainers yet because they are currently holding off on adding more modules. But my example that I have here in this repo is how to do it without any homegrown stuff. It's just using their test container, iContainer, and their container builder to be able to process and do this. So one of the cool things about Flyway is you just give it the connection string, username, password, and then the command migrate. They also have a validate function that in your pipelines you would want to use for like your PR verify step to like if you're running tests on like, hey, is this migration gonna actually work? It'll do a validate. I think it's validate. It's either validate or verify. But basically, it'll look at your Flyway SQL scripts and see if it's doable. And so if you like, fat finger the semicolon in the wrong place, or it's just not right, it will spit out an error message, and so that you can get pretty good confidence in whether or not it would at least migrate. But the migrate command is what will actually run and take all of your versioned SQL and produce your database. So what I'm going to do here is pull up my Docker Compose file to show. You can also set it up in Docker Compose so that when you do your Docker Compose up, it'll automatically kick off the migration so that you don't have to go and manually run it whenever you're trying to test locally. You can just, hey, I'm going to make a change, Docker Compose up, and then it'll be there. So I'm going to real quick make sure I don't have any containers running, and I'm going to go over here and do make up. And so that is starting the container. It is created. There's also a slight chance I might have to like restart Docker because there is a error that I had in earlier today when I was testing it locally. And of course, the whole demoing live. So we'll just go ahead and kill that. See if I can real fast get it to come back up. Hit stop. It does not seem to want to quit. Well, we will force quit it. I'm gonna use my Jedi powers to kill Docker desktop. All right, and see if that kicks it back off to running. Just momentarily, it'll be kicking back off. I think sometimes it takes like a few seconds to be able to restart it whenever I do this. There it is. Cool. All right, pop up that dashboard. Let's just delete those. All right. Now let's see if it is spinning up. Cool. So now this is going to show kind of the output, but basically it did the migrations and they succeeded and it applied for migrations. So if I come over here, I can refresh my database schema and they all stayed the same. If I go over to posts, it's empty. But then the view is here. There's no data right now, but let's see. I think I have a script that I can real quick throw together. Let's do that. New query console. Just throw in data. Cool. So now if I go over to this one, you'll have output as you would expect. If you saw the view briefly, but basically the post title, text, and the author. And yeah, so it just spins it up using SQL. That's kind of really the crux of it, or not the crux, or crux. Anyways, that's kind of the power of using Flyway is being able to manage this using actual SQL files and being able to version your SQL using SQL. For me, that's the beauty of it. There are trade-offs, like I said, of whether you want to manage SQL using SQL or if you want to use Entity Framework to do your migrations. There's different things that you can get from using either. I think for me, the being able to compare the previous version of a view directly to the current version I'm trying to change saves me time as a developer when changing views. But then my hot take is that I would prefer not to have views in my code base at all. But I know that there are places for it, and there's ways that it optimizes queries to use it for some things. But yeah, so I don't exactly have any more of the demo to like walk through unless there's pieces of the code that people want to see. But the main two pieces of it that get it to really run with test containers is this web application factory for spinning up the test server and setting up your dependencies to use the test container, and then a database fixture. The magic of the XUnit side of this is at the very bottom is having a class that inherits the iCollection definition or iCollection fixture. Yes. I happen to see the comment from Simon. I have seen test containers run in the pipeline. Basically what it's doing under the hood is just using Docker and spinning up the actual container and then spinning it down when you're done. I've mostly used Azure DevOps for it because the past few clients that I've worked at that were using test containers were using Azure DevOps. But I believe I've seen at least one example of it working. I think I actually have an example of it working in my GitHub in one of my repos, not specifically this one. I didn't set up a pipeline for this one, but I have used it in the past. So, but would more than love to follow up with you after if you want to connect to talk more about it. But definitely in a pipeline. I've seen it on Azure DevOps very recently. We currently use it at the client that I'm at with the Azure DevOps pipelines. But yeah, the collection fixture, if you're not familiar, XUnit, that allows you to reuse the same class instantiation for other tests. So that way we're able to use the same fixture and be able to reset it in between by calling the reset call on the respawner. So yeah, right here is where it does the reset connection or reset the database. So with that, I think I'm going to jump back over to the slides. Oh, yeah, that's basically it. But I wanted to also reiterate the code retreat thing. I definitely am open to any questions. I know we still got some time for the time slot left, but I wanted to make sure to make time for questions. I can jump back into code or anything. But yeah, my main thing is that test containers are very easy to use, very helpful, and Flyway helps you manage your SQL using SQL.
Yeah, let's open up to questions. Nice work, Patrick. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think you said you already got to that one that's in the chat, Patrick.
Yeah, about using it in pipelines.
Yep. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I believe I have a repo in my GitHub that has it running in a pipeline. If not, I can throw one together fairly quickly this afternoon if somebody wants an example of it, if it's not already there.
Yeah, and we'll any of these repos we'll put out there as well.
Yeah. And that QR code, it goes to a post on my, as I mentioned, newly stood up website just to put things, but the repo is linked there as well for this code base that I just showed. And I have a branch for, the main branch is with Flyway, and then I have a branch for using Entity Framework for migrations.
Okay, Daniel, anything else on your end?
That's it for me. I won't reiterate every single thing I put in chat from the beginning of this meeting, but just as a reminder, if you RSVP'd yes to this meetup, you'll get that stuff in an email after this meeting as well. So, yeah, thank you, Patrick. Awesome.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and then for me, my main thing is that I've seen new faces out here. Would love to see you guys speak. I know, so Patrick McVitie Mills is going to be speaking next month, still waiting on his topic. But anyone else local to Austin, San Antonio, would love to hear you guys.
Yeah.
Okay. Have a great weekend.
Thanks for coming, everyone. See ya.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Awesome.
Thank you. Bye.